Noor, super excited to have you on the Bitcoin Source. It's very interesting, right? Like, there's a lot of people in this ecosystem that do great things for Bitcoin. And, I've been doing my homework on you, and I just think that you're like a superhero in the space. Like, you're a multilingual linguist, you're down in El Salvador changing people's lives. And it's just so awesome to actually finally meet you. So, could you kind of start off by giving an introduction of who you are to the audience?
Thank you. Thank you. You're making me blush a little bit. So, my name is Noor El Bawab. I am the interim CEO of Bitcoin Beach Wallet, and I work with the Galoy team. I've also organized the Adopting Bitcoin conference down in El Salvador, co-organized it with Pretty Flaco in 2021 and 2022, and coming up also in 2023 this year. And a contributor to bitcoinarabic.org, right? So I wear many different hats, but I'd say the main hat that I'm wearing right now is interim CEO of the Bitcoin Beach wallet.
Right? Like, we were talking before we started recording about like how you've found out about me, and it's kind of weird because I feel like it's always a friend of a friend in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So it's like once you know one person, then people start saying, "Hey, check out this podcast or check out this particular person." But I've always noticed that it's very limited to see women in the space, building on Bitcoin. So anytime I can have a woman on as a guest, I'm always super excited. So the first question that I have for you, Noor, is the inception of how you came about sourcing your knowledge about Bitcoin. So whether it was books, courses, or even people in the ecosystem, could you kind of give a backstory on how you kind of got orange pilled?
Sure. Yeah. I got orange pilled through a friend of mine. So I had a pretty good mentor who was a libertarian. I would say, like back in the days, I was working mainly in the tech industry. I had founded a startup incubator back in the days, and I worked with an accelerator investment fund that was focused on the entertainment industry. So I've heard about Bitcoin fairly early on, I would say, through one of the companies that we were supporting, but it just, passed all through my head. So I couldn't understand anything about it. I didn't understand what the hell they were doing. Didn't understand the concept. And then a few years later, I've I had a friend who introduced me to it, and introduced me to how to manage it. How does a seed phrase work, etc. And then it sort of clicked for me because there's I've always loved the concept of sovereignty, like being your own sovereign individual, but also the liberty to rebuild yourself wherever you go in the world because of my family history and, the places I've lived in the past, be it Libya. My parents are originally Palestinian, so, property rights were not always, they were not necessarily they're a source of trauma, I would say, for a lot of Palestinians. So when I understood the concept of how Bitcoin works, it automatically clicked, and it didn't necessarily, the philosophy of it didn't click until also a few years after, because for me it was just a technology that it might work, it might not work, so I just kept it there and didn't look into it until 2020. And that's when I started diving really deep into the rabbit hole through different podcasts, the Stefan Rivera podcast, obviously, Saifedean Ammous, the Bitcoin Standard, the books, etc. So, yeah, it was very slow progression, kind of always in the back of my mind that this Bitcoin thing is interesting. And then I decided to dive I left my fiat world behind in 2021. And moved to El Salvador and didn't look back since. So yeah, and I'm incredibly grateful for the work that I'm doing because I think the El Salvador experience is teaching me a lot, and the fact that I'm now in a position where I can work with other communities as well that are building their own Bitcoin citadels. I would say they're the true citadels. It's very exciting. It's very inspiring to see, like, because they do the work without necessarily anybody asking them to do it. They're not being paid for it, and it's and they know that in the long term it will benefit everybody. So yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and you mentioned talking about not looking back since, and I kind of want you to expound on that because, of course, I know you're a native of Canada, and you could have easily built a meetup in Canada or kind of started your Bitcoin journey in Canada, but you chose El Salvador for a particular reason. And I've always was curious to know, like, when you landed in El Salvador, what was your first Bitcoin experience, whether it was good or bad?
I'm not. I've lived in Canada for a long time, but I'm not native from there. I've lived around in a lot of different places. I stayed in Canada for 15 years, and I've always kept my Bitcoin experience kind of very private for many different reasons. And then in 2021, I guess I decided to take the leap because I couldn't think about anything else. I couldn't focus on anything else. So it was like, okay, let's freaking do that. And then that sometimes you have like opportunities on a silver platter that comes your way and you just can't say no. And I've reached out to the Galoy team because they were organizing the Adopting Bitcoin conference in El Salvador at the time, and I offered my help. So they essentially gave me a week to go down there and help organize the conference that was happening in 2 months. So I was like, you know what, let's do it. Might as well do it. And if something comes out of it after, then great. And if nothing comes out of it, then I would have tried, right? So, and it was once I landed in El Salvador, for me, it was almost like we need to help this country, right? Like that was kind of I was on a mission. We were very mission driven, even with the organizing of the event. Like Pretty Flacco, he's one of the most principled Bitcoiners I've ever met in my life, and I have the privilege to work with. So it was less. We need to make this event as successful as possible because El Salvador kind of needs it. Bringing Bitcoiners to the country, but also help educate the country because most of them 3 months ago have never heard of Bitcoin before, and so my first experience there was obviously like as soon as I landed, I wanted to go somewhere to pay in Bitcoin. And I connected with a local Bitcoiner, a teacher at a school. Actually, he was I think a biology teacher at a local school that I met on Twitter. Went out for coffee, and I paid for my first coffee in Bitcoin, and that was like a pretty exciting moment because it worked seamlessly. They were using a good service, so it worked really well. And we sat down, and I will always remember that moment. I was just sitting down having my coffee using Lightning, and obviously, a few days later, I went to Bitcoin Beach because, we can't discard the fact that all of the El Salvador experience wouldn't have happened if Bitcoin Beach didn't take that leap of faith into building a Bitcoin circular economy in El Zonte. So obviously I went there and I was absolutely amazed by how well everything worked and how easy it seemed for everybody to just use it. And I wouldn't necessarily say they were all Bitcoiners and they all understood what it is, but they used it as a tool that it's supposed to be. And they were and I'm talking to people there and kind of understanding what is it that made them accept it to begin with, and the sort of problems that it solved for them that are now we're seeing more and more in documentaries and in interviews. They're being mentioned more often, right? Like the fact that there was no way to get there's no bank branch in a town like Azante of 5,000 people. There is no point for the bank to have one. It's not cost effective for them to have one there. So with Bitcoin, they managed to create this ecosystem where they're not reliant necessarily on the traditional system, but they can still progress in the current economy, right? In the modern economy, which was fascinating.
And I always look at Bitcoin Beach as like a microcosm for the bigger purpose of Bitcoin. And you know, Bitcoin is kind of subjective, like it means different things for different people. And like for me personally, Bitcoin is freedom money. It allows people that are coming from disenfranchised or, underserved communities to actually have the freedom of their financial, abilities to do things. And I'm sure that that's kind of aligns with your passions. And, you being so passionate about Bitcoin Beach, I've always wanted to know and like take a step back and say like, how did you go about getting involved with Galoy and like having a Bitcoin job? And do you believe that a Bitcoin job finds you instead of you finding it?
That's a good question. So the way it happened is I was looking for a Bitcoin only job for a while, and because of my profile, I'm not a technical person. I'm a business person, and we are a dime in a dozen, right? So I knew that I had to put in some proof of work somehow. And I think when I started reaching out to different companies, in Canada at the time there wasn't a lot of options, at least not Bitcoin focused only. So, and most of them were already fully staffed, so there was no opportunities there. So I started looking outside, and I had known about Bitcoin Beach, the Bitcoin Beach initiative, for a while. And I started doing a little bit more research, and this is how I found out about Galoy. I reached out to Nicholas on Twitter, and then one thing led to the other, and I was sitting down in an interview, and they sent me down to El Salvador. So the initial part was just like, okay, let's just focus on the event for now, and then we'll see what happens later. And that was kind of my opportunities to put in the proof of work, which I think everybody needs to do somehow in the Bitcoin space, right? Like, yes, you do get people through recommendation, and that's how most of the connections happen. But you do also get noticed with the work that you do and the amount of effort that you do, and it doesn't matter how many followers you get. Like, just what you told me at the beginning, like, that was very, very heartwarming, and I appreciate it. And so at the end of the day, I continued with them because I love the work that they do, and I believe in the mission of Galoy, and I believe in the mission of Bitcoin Beach Wallet, right? Like, what's not to like? So Galoy is building the infrastructure for anybody to be a sovereign organization and run their own Bitcoin bank. So that's a great mission, and Bitcoin Beach Wallet is trying to be the number one wallet that anybody anywhere can use and progress through their Bitcoin journey, right? With the learning section, with some integration with Seed Signer eventually, and the other features that we're working on, that the team at Galoy is working on, is going to allow anybody to get onboarded into Bitcoin with the right foot, right? So they're not necessarily getting thrown in a casino and trying to figure it out from there, right? So you start with, and there's a learning integrated, which is awesome. So Pretty Flacco has worked on additional questions that will be added in future releases of the app, where people will literally be diving into the rabbit hole through the application while using it in practice to send and receive transactions, and through the map they can find out where they can go and spend their Bitcoin. So it's really a fantastic product, and it wouldn't have been that good if it wasn't for Nicholas's. Also, he took a leap of faith and settling in Azante for a while to build this wallet for the people, with the people, right? So he didn't build it from his office or at home somewhere in the West. He actually moved to Azante to understand the need of the people, and then built the wallet specifically for those needs. And that's why I think the reward of this kind of initiative is paying off, because a lot of people are recommending it, right? A lot of people are using it to onboard others into the Bitcoin standard.
Yes, and earlier I called you a superhero because I just think that you're very ambidextrous with your skill set, and you mentioned that you were a dime of a dozen, but I don't truly believe that. And I've always wanted to know, like, how do you juggle being a director of partnerships at one company and an interim CEO at Bitcoin Wallet Beach? Like, that's just something that's so different and unique.
Yeah, so the director of partnership is kind of like that was what I did before. Now I'm focusing only on the Bitcoin Beach wallet part of the work. It's it takes a huge amount of, I guess, for now it's fine because the event is still a few months away, and we're getting so much support. I mean, working with Bitcoiners is so refreshing, because there are very few no divas, right? Like, because I worked in the entertainment industry before, so the contracts was striking from the beginning. They're always there. They're always willing to help. They're always willing to lend a hand. They're very forgiving of like minor detail that I can only see, but the others can. So it's been fun to work with the ecosystem in general, because they're so generous with their time, with their knowledge, with their know-how. So there's never any lack of finding the right person to do something and they want to help, and so the moment you ask for it, there's inevitably someone that will lend a hand. So that's been my experience with the event in particular. And then obviously, so I would say 99.9% of my time is focused on Bitcoin Beach Wallet now, and then I will transition a little bit differently as time progresses. And then my contribution with Bitcoin Arabic is mainly focused on, supporting those that are doing, right? So I'm not necessarily doing the translation myself, but I try to help those that are doing the translation, finding new articles that could be translated, finding translators, etc. So it's not taking that much time, and I have great colleagues there as well with Arabic Huddle that is doing most of the operation. He's doing a podcast as well in Arabic that is I have to say, is fantastic. It's one of my go-tos now. And so it's not about the individual, right? Like there's always a team and there's always people behind us, right? And with the Bitcoin Beach Wallet, it's the same. Like the team that we have is very driven. They're all Salvadorians, and they appreciate the work, I think, that Bitcoin Beach Wallet is doing for their country, right? So yeah. You're never alone on these things.
Yeah, I asked that because I do so much in the space myself. I write, I create content. I try to do like long editorial blogs, kind of like educating people from my community on this stuff. And I'm kind of learning now about the appreciation of having a team and not trying to be so individualistic about my approach to Bitcoin. So I love to just hear someone that's kind of done it before me actually see the benefits of doing that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can't do anything alone. So you have to have a team, and you have to have a team at least at the beginning that is as passionate as you are. And yeah, I think Nicholas did a great job in assembling that team. And with the Bitcoin Beach Wallet now, the team is not only because you have to again. So it's most Salvadorians didn't necessarily know about Bitcoin before last year. So finding Bitcoiners on Salvador it's been tough. But what I love seeing is how much, even with as they're building their knowledge, as they're working with Bitcoin Beach Wallet, they're getting increasingly more passionate about it, and it's fun to watch.
Yeah, and building on what you just said there, where you said that it's kind of hard to get El Salvadorians to kind of onboard onto Bitcoin. I wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the Chivo wallet.
And
Is it true that Salvadorians are not fans of it, or is this more of a first world American approach when they go to El Salvador and try to use the wallet? And what can the government do to make it more user friendly, in your opinion?
I mean, you gotta give credit where credit is due. The Chivo wallet was deployed in 3 months and onboarded 6 million people in a day. I, you know, I challenge you to find a single startup in the world that's ever done that, right? So it was never an easy task to undertake, and I think the speed at which they've done it was absolutely mind blowing and impressive. So you got to give credit where credit is due. The ATMs as well that they've distributed everywhere, but running a company with operation at that scale, at that speed, will come with headaches, right? Unfortunately, these kind of headaches when people are less forgiving of when it comes to their money, right? So if they would have rolled out a little bit slower, maybe onboarded little by little, maybe taken 6 months instead of three, so that they can iron out the kinks, it would have helped a lot. But hindsight is always 2020, right? I don't know what I would have done if I was in their situation, and I don't know why they made the decision to go at the speed that they've went. So, is there problems with the Chivo wallet? There is some, yes. I mean, you can get a call a spade, but there are some fixes. Then, unfortunately, with some fixes, there's other bugs that appear, right? So it's always this back and forth. But there is the problem that happened is because of the fast rollout and the kinks that happened at the beginning, people kind of lost trust with it a little bit. So a lot of the people that started using it initially didn't stop using it after the fact. But The other thing that you need to credit the Salvadorian government with is that they never actually forced the wallet on anybody, right? Like, it's not a requirement to use the Chivo wallet. So people can do their own research and find other wallets that work better and, or work for their needs, right? Because Chivo works for a specific type of profile, and it might not work for everybody. And so they did keep that leeway for people to pick another wallet. That's fine. So yeah, it's, what do they need to do? They need to have it. It needs to be Lightning first, right? Because Chivo is supposed to be used for everyday payments, right? For people that don't have access to a bank account, that are having one for the first time, be it Bitcoin or the Chivo dollars. And that in of itself is useful for Salvadorians, especially considering the fact that 75% of them were not banked until 2021, right? So there is more work and education that needs to happen, and a lot of people are pointing their finger again at the government for doing that, and I also give them credit for not impeding other initiatives to go ahead and start educating other people. So Hope House is doing that, Me Premier Bitcoin is doing that, there's a new initiative now called La Casa del, the Bitcoin Embassy, there's La Casa del Bitcoin, there's so many other initiatives that are doing the educational part, and slowly but surely they're contributing to improving the situation. So could they do more? For sure, they could. There is a lot more to be improved on. But I would say, again, it is what it is. Now we just need to, help educate the people and help getting them onboarded the right way. And there's one thing I think that was sort of an interesting approach, but in the grand scheme of things, it always goes back to the proof of work. Is even with the $30 drop that they've made on all people of El Salvador, it's not necessarily going to mean that people will convert, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that just because you gave $30 worth of Bitcoin to people that they're gonna, start using Bitcoin, right? So you have to like take it slow, and then walk people through it as a journey, right? So yeah, but you have to also come to El Salvador to understand a little bit the reality on the ground, right? So people sitting down in their offices and saying, "Oh, El Salvador is no one uses Bitcoin, it's failing, blah blah blah." We're talking about a society that was mostly using cash. Credit cards are barely a thing, right? It's not like in other Latin American countries. So I was in Brazil last week. No one uses cash. Like when I paid in cash, people look at me weird, right? And that's Brazil. It's like right next door. And it's the same thing here in Lima. Barely anybody uses cash. Everybody uses. But El Salvador, no. El Salvador, 75% of people are not banked. 99.9 used cash, right? And then all of a sudden, they're now discovering this magic internet money. It's going to take a while. It's not an overnight thing. And I think already in 2 years, what they've done is amazing.
And I agree. I think that what they've done is amazing as well. And it makes me think like and wonder if the government, or even not the government, but just people, civilians on the ground, will kind of create this lightning node server where they can kind of facilitate for the rest of the country. If they have a lot more nodes there, it will make the lightning integration a lot more easier for El Salvadorians. I'm sure someone's coming up with that idea. And it makes me wonder about something else too. When you mentioned Brazil, I actually interviewed Renata Rodriguez from Fediment, and we talked about Brazil and like kind of like the situations that people undergo there. And when you look at the Middle East and all these other places that people actually need Bitcoin, do you ever foresee yourself going back to the Middle East and kind of like, building something there more concrete and, trying to facilitate Bitcoin? Because I know that they're not as open to Bitcoin as some other places. So I was always curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I would never say never, but I also don't know what the future holds, right? So if that opportunity arises, then yes, absolutely. Because yeah, as you said, like the Middle East is a place that absolutely needs Bitcoin. But we'll see. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're doing BitcoinArabic.org, right? It's an all signal kind of site. No talking about anything else. It's only about Bitcoin. Trying to teach people slowly but surely. And the podcast that Arabic Huddle is doing now is getting a lot more traction. So, if there's something down the line that happens, and I think there is already a lot of openness there for Bitcoin. It's just that I would say the political situation doesn't allow people to come out as much, right? The most intense anons that I know are Arabs. So there might be a lot of weird Twitter profiles that they're just somewhere in the Middle East, and they're using the freedom money to operate in the 21st century, right? So it's yeah, I would never say no to this. Like, I love the Middle East; it's in my heart, and yeah.
Yeah, even for me as like a podcast host, I've been searching and looking for like Muslim Bitcoiners, people that can kind of talk about this and, really give a bigger explanation. And it's super difficult. And, I understand why, I'm first generation. My parents are immigrants to this country. So I understand that there's a lot of different politics that are involved when you're coming from another country. There's regimes, there's governments that have sole control of the way you think, what you eat, everything. So, yeah, so it's like Bitcoin is kind of, there to kind of disrupt that kind of status quo, and of course they don't like those things. So, I always think that you're very brave and you're very like strong-willed to continue to push this fight of bringing Bitcoin to the world now. So I appreciate it.
For me, it was always a way to say, hey, we're here, right? Like, if you're thinking about Bitcoin, you're not alone, because it's like it's kind of isolating when you do it because, as I said, like I was very private about my interest in Bitcoin for a long time, and then and then I realized, well, there's a lot more people out there that speak my language that also might also feel even more isolated than I am. So I felt almost like a duty to do it. So yeah, I'm happy, and I'm like the when I talk to my fellow Middle Eastern Arab Bitcoiners, it's always I learn the most from them, I would say. They're very knowledgeable. They're just incredibly smart human being, and I'm happy to be able to actually connect with them, even though I've never met a single one of them. Right, like all the translators that are on Bitcoin Arabic, I don't. Some of them I don't even know their name. So, so it's awesome. Yeah.
So Nora, like, what would be your call to action? Like, if you had to, describe Bitcoin or, help, some young girl in the Middle East or in Brazil that's like interested in being inspired by you, like, what would be your call to action to her to like get onto Bitcoin?
Um, just get on it. I guess I'm not gonna lie, right? Like the space is intimidating, even for me. Like and I love the fact that oftentimes I'm not. I feel like I work with guys that are super brilliant. I learn so much from them, and I listen to them. I'm like, what the hell are they talking about? And sometimes I go on Google and search what the hell is that. And that's and I know that girls generally tend to be a lot more self conscious about their own ability, and I think that's it's just innate. It's something that is innate in us that we can't shake off. But you have to just reach out to people, and you'll realize it's not as scary as it seems from the outside, right? So if there is a girl out there that is listening, and who wants to get into the space, I think she should, because she'll realize they're from the outside, and then if you only focus on Twitter and all the toxicity and stuff like that, you might be like, oh my god, I can't deal with this. I don't know if I can. What if they lash onto me? If you just start talking to people, you realize they're so open and so willing to take the time to teach and explain things.
So Nora, this Bitcoin conversation has been awesome. I learned so much about you. Awesome advice, Nora. I really appreciate it. And I have a 2-year-old daughter, so maybe a decade from now she'll see this interview and be inspired. So I truly appreciate those words of wisdom.